Good morning. Ooh, that's loud. Good morning. It's good to see everybody this morning. Hope everybody had I'm going to drop this down a little bit. There we go. There we go. Hope everybody had a good time this week with family and ate a lot of food, I'm sure, and was able to get some naps in to help recover. Probably some of us are still recovering from that. But it was a blessing to be able to be together with our family, with our friends, right? Share a meal and share some time together. So that's always a good thing. And so with that this morning, our hopes are we're going to finish off Deuteronomy this morning. And then next week, Chip is going to start the book of Joshua next week. So with that, if you'll pray with me, we'll enter into our last lesson in the book of Deuteronomy. If you'll pray with me. Heavenly Father, we are grateful for another day that you give us, the many things you bless us with, Lord, and one of those blessings is the blessing of relationships, Lord, and we have time throughout the year where we get to come together as a family and have friends over and people we don't get to see a lot, and we get to catch up and talk to them and see what's going on in their lives, and that's just such a great thing, Lord, and we're grateful for that. We're grateful for the relationship that we get to have with you, and the fact that you choose to have fellowship with us is just such an incredible thought, an amazing thing. And we just ask you, Lord, as we go through this last lesson in Deuteronomy, that we'll be able to take from it some things that we can apply to our lives, Lord, and just help us, Lord, as we move forward to be a people that desires to know more about you and who you would have us to be in your Son's name. Amen. All right. I appreciate Steve stepping in last week and for me. The doctor told me, he said, you can't do anything to get your blood pressure up, at least for the first week after you have this surgery. And I was like, can't get my blood pressure up. Okay, so that means I can't watch football. It means I can't watch, do anything, right? Make sure the news stays off, right? And whatnot. So I appreciate Steve coming in and doing that last week for me, and Chris speaking and Ken speaking Sunday morning and Sunday night. So our goal today is to finish out Deuteronomy. I asked y'all last week that we'd get through the content, and then perhaps maybe with the time that we have remaining, maybe look at some overall lessons, some things we've taken from Deuteronomy, some things that we've learned through the process, and we can go through those as we get to that point, and then next week we'll start fresh with Joshua, and that's going to be a great blessing to all of us, because Joshua is an incredible book. If you've ever studied it, it's an amazing book with so many lessons. So Deuteronomy, all right. So last week Steve got to the point where we get into the Song of Moses, okay, and this is Deuteronomy 31. At the very tail end of it, and then entering into chapter 32. And I'm not gonna read the entire Song of Moses, but with the study guide that you've been given, we'll kind of go through it section by section and go from there. So Moses here, he gathered the elders and officers of the various tribes to teach them the song which he had written. And now the Song of Moses is outlined in various forms, with various parts. First, you have your introduction in chapter 32. And so after calling on heaven and earth to give ear to his words, Moses ascribed greatness to God. He described God as follows. He is a rock. His work is perfect. For all his ways are judgment. He's a God of truth and without iniquity. Just and right is he. Verse 4. In contrast to God, Israel had corrupted themselves. And so as we get this introduction into the Song of Moses, the song that he had been instructed to write and that he had written, the first thing that he points out is he illustrates and he introduces the fact that God is all of these great things, right? He is worthy of the praise. He's worthy of the glory. He is a good and a great God. And so with that being said, had God ever failed Israel? Never. He had never failed Israel. And so the problem was with the who? Israelites. It was with them. Okay? The problem never was with God. It was with them. Okay, God has His expectations, y'all. Today with us, and this morning we'll be talking about fellowship with God. Having fellowship with God is an incredible thing, but it comes with expectations. God expects certain things from His children, right? And so with that, He expected certain things from Israel. And there was never an issue on His part. It was always with them. And so when you look at what His expectations were for Israel, were they too high? Because sometimes we can do that. Sometimes we can set our expectations way too high. I remember when I was going to school, I was taking math classes, and typically you always have that one class that you struggle with, right? Math was really my kryptonite, so to speak. You had 4, but he did really good at PE. Lunch. Math was my kryptonite, and I remember when I got my progress report, and I was not doing so well. I think I had what they called a D back in the day. Y'all remember D's? We don't give D's anymore. It's just you either passing or you're failing, right? But back then I think that was more of a mercy seat, so to speak. You got a D, so you're not completely failing, but you're not passing at all. And so there's hope, I guess. And I remember I had a D, and I remember I was talking with that, and they said, let's set some expectations for you. You can get to a B in math. And I said, I think y'all are really overshooting my capability here. And so we negotiated a C. But sometimes we can set our expectations too high, right? Did God set His expectations too high with Israel? Now, y'all say that was a resounding no. Why do you say no? He knows all. He knows all things, but what I'm getting at here is when He sets His expectations up for Israel, are they too high in that Israel could not achieve them? Why not? That's it. That was it. All you got to do is obey Him, correct? And you achieve those expectations. So the problem wasn't that God had said, I'm going to put something on your shoulders or on your back that you can't do, right? Just like today, we think about Christians today. There's a lot of things that we deal with, right? There's a lot of hardship, there's struggle. Jesus was very forthright with that, and He told us, this life is not going to be easy, right? If it wasn't easy for me, it ain't going to be easy for you. But He also assures us that, when you think about the loads that we bear, and they are heavy at times, are they insurmountable? Not at all. Not at all. And that's also, when you get into Galatians 6, when he says bear each other's burdens, that's part of that. That's part of that fellowship with each other, right? Helping each other. God gives a way that we can endure that. And so with that, God was a great God. He's in this introduction here into the Song of Moses, He's a great God. He has all these incredible attributes. And so with that, the problem's never been Him, it was you. It was us. It was never Him. His expectations are not too high that they cannot be achieved or be followed. It just comes down to us. And then he gets into this second section of the song where he's talking about Israel's benefits here. Israel's apostasy was worse because of the bounty of God's grace, which he had received. God had set the bounds of the people according to His intended will to Israel. He had taken Israel as an orphan child in a desert land and adopted him as a son. He had led Israel in the wilderness and kept him as the apple of His eye, protecting him as an eagle does her young. From the most desolate of circumstances, God gave Israel a bounty in chapter 32. And so the reason why, we look at apostasy here and the idea of apostasy. And somebody want to tell me what apostasy essentially is? It's falling away, okay? It's basically turning our backs, right? Matter of fact, there's a word that we use today. It's called betrayal, correct? We betray God, so to speak. Is that fair? When we turn away from God, when we turn away from the truth, when we turn away from Him, it's a betrayal. And apostasy here, it was worse, y'all. It was worse for Israel because of how good God had been to them. Okay? You know, you think about, everybody wants to focus on the punishments that, sometimes we want to focus on the hardship of the punishments that God gave out to Israel. But here's the thing. There's never a punishment if you just do what you're supposed to do, right? The punishment was intended to bring Israel back to where they should be with Him. That's the idea of any punishment, right? When you discipline your child, you don't just do it for kicks and giggles, right? You do it for what? To teach them a lesson, to straighten out a behavior that you know is wrong. That's the whole goal of it. Israel's apostasy was so bad because of how good God had been to them. You think about the grace, the mercy, the patience that God had with this people. Okay? I don't have that type of patience. Do y'all have that type of patience? Not at all. Not at all. I mean, you think about the times that Moses stepped in and begged God for these people because of the love that he had for them. You think of the patience Moses had to have with these people. My goodness. It was incredible. It was incredible. And so he had given them so much that apostasy was viewed to be that terrible. And today you think about what we can have in Jesus Christ, correct? You think about, when people, I don't know if about you, but have you ever heard someone say, I just can't imagine that God's going to send anybody to hell? Have you ever heard that? I just can't imagine God's going to do that because He loves us, His children, so much. How can a God do that, right? Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. You got to keep your focus on God. You got to keep your focus on God. And if you do that, of course, y'all, we're humans, and we're gonna have our hiccups, right? We're gonna have our issues from time to time. But if you pick yourself back up and get your focus back where it should be, are we going to be okay? We should be, absolutely. Third section he gets into, he talks about Israel's apostasy. But Jeshurun waxed fat and kicked, verse 15. As Israel prospered, she forsook God and lightly esteemed the rock of her salvation, verse 15. They turned aside to idols, provoking Jehovah to jealousy. Their sacrificing to idols was described as sacrificing to devils, not to God. And so with that, prosperity was good. It helped them from day to day, but one of the worst things about their prosperity is it got them comfortable. And when it got them comfortable, y'all, they turned from God. And that happens today, does it not? We get, when you're in the grind of life, and, every day's the struggle, that when you're depending, your prayer life is incredible because what are you doing? You're in conversation with God all day long. Why? Because there's struggle, right? You think about the world today. You think about Christians in places like China and Iran, Iraq, places like that. Do you think that they, where do you think their faith is at? Do you think they got a deep faith? Absolutely. Are they comfortable? Not at all. Okay? Because you don't know what tomorrow's going to bring, correct? And so with that, their prosperity had been their downfall, so to speak. And so with that, when you become prosperous, what he's saying here is that sometimes we can lose focus of where the prosperity comes from. sometimes as we become prosperous, we think it's us, right? We think that it begins and ends with us, and we forget where the blessings come from. And that's what Israel had done. They forgot where it all came from. And if we're not careful, y'all, we'll do the same thing. We'll do the same thing with that. All right. The fourth part of this, the Lord would punish them for being wicked. He saw the apostasy. He resolved to hide his face from Israel, even as Israel provoked God to jealousy by their idols. The Lord promised to provoke Israel to jealousy by those who were no people. A fire was kindled to destroy Israel. Israel would be scattered among the nations, but for the Lord's concern that the Gentiles would attribute their success in defeating Israel to their own power, Israel would have been completely annihilated. Israel was a nation void of wisdom, as manifested by his rejection of God. Her strength had been in her God, not her own military prowess. Even the Gentiles recognized that Israel's power was her God. Despite God's grace to Israel, the nation produced rotten fruit. And it's comparable, y'all, to the vine of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, how bad was Sodom and Gomorrah? You go back to Genesis, I think it's Genesis 19, I think. You go back to Sodom and Gomorrah, y'all, not a whole lot of redeeming factors there, right? I mean, you get a small glimpse of the attitude of the individuals that inhabited those places. And it's not a place I wanted to be or I wanted to live. I don't know about y'all. It's like, I mean, it was the picture of evil, if you will. The depths of truly the lowest of lows of man. And he compares here the fruit of this nation and their wickedness to that. And we know what God would do with Sodom and Gomorrah. And then God said that he would have mercy on Israel in his judgment. God's purpose toward Israel was laid up among his treasures. Vengeance belongs to God, for the Lord would judge his people. When under judgment from Jehovah, the Lord would ask, "Where are your gods, or where are your idols?" The idols to whom Israel turned were unable to stand before God. God alone has the power of life and death. When he raises his sword in judgment, none can stand before him. The song closes with a call on the nations to rejoice with the people of God, who would not only execute vengeance on Israel, but also be merciful to him. And so that's the Song of Moses. And as that song ends, and you hear about really the foretelling of what's coming, if you're the Israelite that's listening to this, what's your thoughts? Anything? Yeah. Is that what people do? We get serious about something and then we just move on to the next thing, right? That's one of the things about politics. We think something happens and we think it's a big issue, and then 2 weeks later, what are we doing? We've moved on to something else, right? We've moved on to some other political issue, okay? Because there's always something else that gets our attention. This right here, y'all, should have been paramount, in their lives, because he's laid it out. Moses has laid everything out to them, okay? This is who you are. This is what you have done. This is why you were punished. And guess what? And as we move forward, what are you going to do? You're going to do the same thing, right? You're not going to learn your lesson. And eventually you're going to be taken away. You're going to be dispersed. You're going to be taken away. And if I'm hearing that, if I'm the average person, I'm a little concerned. But then you also have people that pray are like, well, you know what? I won't be here when it happens, so I ain't worried about it, right? You read those articles. I don't know about y'all, but you read those articles, you see those things, in The sun is going to, I saw there was something that came on there, the sun's going to lose or explode or something like that, lose its ability to heat our universe in like 1.5 million years or something like that. And everybody's going nuts about it. And I'm like, I ain't worried about it, y'all. You know why I'm not worried about it? I ain't worried about it. My dad, we have a running joke. I have a running joke with him because one of his greatest fears is being cremated. He does not want to be cremated. And I joke with him because when he aggravates me, I'm like, you know what? Guess who's going to make that decision? This guy. Keep on aggravating me, see what happens to you. You better not do that. I said, what you going to do? I said, Dad, you ain't going to be worried about any of that kind of stuff. He says, yeah, but just the thought of it bothers me. I said, it won't be in your mind, I promise you. You don't think about that far ahead, right? But everything that God's saying was going to come true. It's going to be, some of this stuff was going to be generations from that point. But it was going to happen. It's just like today with America. We like to think that, we're always going to be this type of country, correct? You're one generation away from being completely different. Because what happens, every generation is different. Every generation, I got kids that can get their phones out and do all kinds of crazy stuff with it, and I'm just trying to understand how to upload a video, right? It's just, yes, sir. Well, in this world today, obviously, I think we have two fronts. There's two battles that we face. Obviously, there's the spiritual battle that means everything, correct? That's the one we wrestle with every single day, to be who God expects me to be. But that physical battle, y'all, that physical battle that we have, can lend itself to having issues in the spiritual battles. That makes sense? When these bodies start going out on us, right? When we start getting flat tires and everything else, it can have a devastating. It can hang on us, right? It can hang on us, and so with that, we have to. It's kind of keeping your perspective where it should be, and understanding where the blessings come from, understanding how great God is. If Israel would have done that, they don't have hardly any of the issues that they did have. They wouldn't have experienced all the punishments that they got if they would have just kept their focus where it should have been. And that's just the universal human issue. And so from this point, after the song, Moses would go on in chapter 32 and verse 47. He would say to them, For it is not a futile thing for you, because it is your life, and by this word you shall prolong your days in the land which you cross over the Jordan to possess. And so what he was saying here in verses 44 through 47 is there's an exhortation here to obey the law. Okay, after Moses spoke the words of the song to the people of Israel, he exhorted them to abide in the law. For this is your life. Okay? This is your life. This will be your life as a group of people. This will be as you move forward. If you do not obey this law, this is what's going to happen to you. This is your life. Same thing with us today. We either stand with God or we pull away from God. This is your life. So spiritually speaking, this is your life. Will you stay with God through the ups, through the downs? Will you finish the race? Or will you just say it's too much and I can't do it? What are you going to do? This is your life. Because in the end, y'all, we stand before God. Singularly, we stand before God. Okay? There's no character witnesses. God is not a respecter of persons. He sees the heart. He sees the mind. This is your life. Will you stand with Him, or will you allow the things of this world to pull you away from Him? There's no excuse. I can make excuses about everything, right? And I do sometimes. I do. God ain't going to listen to any of that foolishness. He ain't going to. All right. So then we get to the death of Moses. Was prophesied there. The Lord commanded Moses on that same day to ascend Mount Nebo so that he could look into the land of Israel's inheritance, and there he would die and be gathered unto his people. The Lord reminded Moses of his sin, which kept him out of the promised land. Nevertheless, the Lord was gracious to Moses in allowing him to see Canaan. As this is closing down, so to speak, and we're right there on the precipice of Moses' physical death here. God reminds him, hey, there's a reason why you can't go into the promised land. You remember that? I don't know about y'all. That's probably something Moses probably didn't want to hear that. We don't typically like to be reminded of really mistakes that we make, do we? There's sometimes when I would talk to older people, they would always be like, you remember so and this is one of those moments where, God says, your sin is what's keeping you out of here. And I'm sure Moses is like, Lord, I got it. I remember. I know. That had to be on his heart. It had to be on his mind. But God is gracious here. He allows Moses to look into Canaan to see this land. And that speaks to the relationship that Moses had with God. God did not have to do that, did he? He did not have to do that. He chose to do that because that spoke to the love that he had for Moses. Here's a guy, y'all, that, one of the greatest leaders in human history. What was strapped on his shoulders and the weight that he carried is immense. And I dare you find anybody outside of Jesus, which, his own son, that had a closer relationship with him. Who can you name that had a closer relationship with God as a human, than Moses? Some people might say David or Elijah, but I'm sorry, even as great as those individuals were, even speaking to what God would say about David and how we know Elijah's story within, right? The love that God had for those individuals were immense, but from my human mind, I just can't think of someone who had a closer relationship than Moses. And that's just me with my human mind. I'm sure God would probably say, I love them all. They're all special to me, But we as humans, we like to categorize things, right? Go ahead. You say? That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. It speaks to what Jesus said about when he's talking about worry, and he's talking about anxiety and those type of things. And he says, "Don't worry about tomorrow." Why? Yeah, but tomorrow will have its own issues. Correct? You get through today. You get through today, because today's going to have its own battles. And so you survive today. Then you get to tomorrow, because we don't even know if we got tomorrow. So you deal with today, and you get through today. Your shortcomings, you learn from them, you repent, you do better. But getting to what Troy was saying there, we can't marginalize our relationship with God. We can't say that I'm a Christian during this time of the day, but not that time of the day. I'm a Christian on Sunday mornings and Wednesday nights, but I'm not a Christian, when I'm dealing with 16-year-olds in high school, right? You know what I mean? Even though there's some days they almost like pull the Christianity out of you. I'm joking. That's right. And you said something there. Moses will be in heaven, right? And I always thought about we read about these biblical heroes, so to speak, and we read about these people that we gain immense respect for. And I just, in my mind, I'm like, I can't wait to meet so and so or so and so or so and so. And then I balance that with when you read about what heaven is, and I'm like, am I even going to be concerned about that? You know what I mean? I'm just going to be so happy to be there that the side benefit is these other individuals will be there with you. You know what I mean? We're all there together. So to close out, Moses goes through and he gives blessings. They begin in chapter 33, and he deals with the groups with Reuben. I'm going to go through these individually. With Reuben, and in view of the slightly diminishing of the numbers of the tribe of Reuben, Moses expressed the desire that tribe would not die out but increase. With Judah, the role of leadership is not significantly emphasized in his blessing. Moses appealed for the Lord to hear the cries of Judah and to make her adequate to lead his people. With Simeon, the tribe of Simeon is not mentioned in the blessing. In Jacob's blessing on his children, he prophesied that Simeon would be scattered among the other tribes because of his part in avenging Dinah of the Shechemites. In the giving of the land inheritance under Joshua, this tribe was given a portion of the southern part of the inheritance of Judah. With Levi was joined with Simeon and sin, who shared in the prophecy of being scattered among the tribes, turned his curse into a blessing. Because of the tribe's role in executing the righteous judgment of God without partiality, the tribe was given the blessing of becoming teachers of the Lord's law as they were scattered among the tribes. Moses asked the Lord to bless Levi and defeat her enemies. Benjamin, Moses prophesied that the Lord's protection would be given to the tribe of Benjamin. Joseph, both the tribes of Manasseh and Ephraim were included under the name of Joseph. To these tribes, God promised abundance and strength. Zebulun and Issachar, Zebulun would be blessed in his going out, probably a reference to future activity and trade, and Issachar in his tents, probably a reference to his agricultural success. Both would prosper. Gad, the military power of this tribe, would be foretold. Dan is compared to a lion's whelp which leaps from Bashan, emphasizing the vigor with which they would enter conflict. Don't know if that's a good decision-making ability, but we'll see. Naphtali, the words of blessing to Naphtali emphasize the receiving of great abundance. And then Asher would be blessed with children, blessing, strength, and stability. The blessing of Moses concludes with an attribution of the success of the tribes to their great God. There is none like Israel's God. The eternal God is thy refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms. Consequently, Israel could drive out his enemies from before him and dwell in safety in the promised land. Israel was blessed to have such a God. And then as we close Deuteronomy, we see the death of Moses. In obedience to God, Moses ascended Mount Nebo to the top of Pisgah. There God allowed him to look over into Canaan to see the land of Israel's inheritance. And then Moses died. The Lord buried his body in a valley in the land of Moab. Moses died at 120 years old. The children of Israel mourned his passing for 30 days. After that, we see that Joshua would assume leadership, and there would be a final tribute to Moses. Moses lived 120 years. That's a long time. You know, somebody asked the question, how long do you want to live? Because, you know, we live in a society where everybody's trying to find the miracle drug to live forever, correct? How long do you want to live? You know, the older I get, I don't know. I mean, I want to know that my kids are doing good, that they're on their own 2 feet, that they're okay. There's things I would like to see, but, I don't know if I want to be around for 120 years. That's a long time. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. You climb a mountain at 120, those legs ain't gave out yet. They ain't gave out yet. All right, Troy, what you got? Yeah, he did. That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's right. That's right. That's right. That's exactly right. It was in three parts, if you will. It was in 3 parts, and you can, you look at that last part, right? He was strong up into those last years because he had to be. He had to be, right? You think about the position that he had and what he had to do. He didn't have it, he had to be. There's people that will grind and they'll keep going and going because they got to. They don't have a choice, right? Eventually the body catches up to us, right? In this life that we live in now, the body catches up with us with so many things that afflict us and whatnot. So as Deuteronomy ends here, what are some major lessons? What are some big picture things that maybe stood out to you? Some things that came to your mind as we were going through this study. Yes. Oh, yes. That's exactly right, Mr. Jerry. You got to, those every 7 years this would be read to the whole group, right? Why? Because you need to remember. And that was actually my number one. When I was sitting there thinking about it, it was, what do you see throughout Deuteronomy? Remember, remember, remember. And the whole emphasis was you remember because you will forget. It is easy to forget. Joey got me in so much trouble 2 years ago because, Joey does the light, all the lights and whatnot, and he wanted me to come and I don't see any kids in here, so he wanted me to play Santa Claus. Well, he did it on the 21st of December. And, on December 21st, that's my anniversary. And I forgot. Oh, yeah, buddy, it was fun. It was fun. I told him that moving forward, I've learned from that mistake. But, y'all, we forget. We forget things. You get going in life and you forget. Even things like that. And I know that's like one thing you don't forget, but I forgot. And but we get going, and it can only go uphill from there, right? Uh, but you know, the whole idea of Deuteronomy throughout the book is remember, 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 remember. Remember, because you will forget. As a nation, you'll forget. As a family, you'll forget. As a society, you'll forget. As a person, you'll forget. So you've got to remember these things. And you know, and so with that, remember. What else do we got? That's right. That's right. And over time, you know, that Hebrew oral tradition, in other words, you would just commit it to memory. You would commit it to over time as you would go forward. You would remember all this stuff, and that was incredible in its own right. I had this one. How about, you know, the idea of make a choice? You know, you go through Deuteronomy. What's the continual idea here? Israel, make a choice. Make a choice. Either be with God or not. But you got to make a choice here. If you make a choice and you stay with God, here are the blessings. If you do not, here's the curses. Right? Okay? It can be good for you or it can be bad for you, but you got to make a choice. Well, I think you parallel that with today. I mean, how many people grow up in the church, and you know, you're talking about with idols, right? How in the world could somebody who grew up in the midst of all the Israelites and saw all the blessings and you know and saw all these different type of things, and God told them, do not marry in with these people, right? And how many times today do we see people get pulled away from God because of relationships they choose to enter into? It's the same thing. And then you come to the New Testament and you see people that saw Jesus literally restore sight, literally allow paralytics to walk, to see him call Lazarus out of a tomb, and people still walked away from him. Yes, yes. Nothing. Yes. Somebody once told me a person is smart. A person is smart, but people are not. Now you think about that for a second. A person is smart, but people are not. And the reason, what the whole idea was this: an individual who will look at this and will dissect and examine this, right? And look at that. A person can make an incredibly sound decision. People as a whole, sometimes they will just follow what the group wants to do. And you see it. You see it in everything. I mean, you look at, just people, what are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing? Okay, that's what we're going to do. Okay, you know? You think about Jesus, you think about, when, he, throughout that last week of his life, you think about, he's welcomed into Jerusalem as a king. Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest, right? They lay the palm branches down. And a couple of, days after that, what are they doing? Crucify him, crucify him. How quickly can we be swayed as people? Some people just, I want to do what the majority wants to do. You know what? Because as an individual, I won't stand up. And that's an amazing and a tragic thing right there. And then, go ahead. Right. We have idols in our lives, absolutely. See, those idols, the idea of the idol has shifted from being a statue or this or that to be now other things such as relationships, jobs, careers, sports, this, that, the other. The idea of an idol has never changed. It's just what the idols have become. And as individuals, you know, it's tragic. It really is. Last thing that I will say before we conclude, and I turn it over to Chip for next Sunday with Joshua. In Deuteronomy, we see the idea that God values relationship. He values relationship. The question is, will we have a relationship with our God? Will we desire a relationship with our God? He wants to have that with us. He wanted to have that with Israel. He stayed with Israel as long as he possibly could, and then he opened up a door to everybody else as well. So do we value the relationship with him that he values to have with us? And that's what it comes down to. I put my time and my energy into the things that matter most, right? That's what tells people what, that's a cheat sheet on every single one of us. What I put the most time in is what matters the most to me. Whether it's my job, my family, whatever, you know? And so with that, we got to remember it. All right. We're past our time. Thank you so much for the participation in the study through Deuteronomy, and looking forward to Chip leading us through the Promised Land next Sunday. Thank you.